So the aim of this presentation is introducing the pedagogical approach of the School of Architecture of Valparaiso, as an example of local challenge to the traditional Eurocentric vision of America. The School of Architecture of Valparaiso is founded in the 50s by the Chilean architect Alberto Cruz Covarrubias and the Argentinian poet Godofredo Yomi Marini. Even if it was part of the Catholic University of Valparaiso, since its origins, the school works as an autonomous institute with its own goals and a new pedagogical vision, inspired in the poetry and in the international artistic environment frequented by the members of the school, particularly in Paris. From a pedagogical perspective, the cornerstones of the school are the vision of the concept of architecture as a collective and poetic enterprise, and the idea of continental integration, which unifies the whole American continent as an independent place, autonomous from Europe as for its origin, identity, and ideology. The collective and collaborative conception of architecture led to the foundation of the Open City in 1967 by the member of the school in Ritoque, near Valparaiso. On the other hand, the idea of America as a spatial and ideological context separated from Europe inspires a series of travels crossing the continent called by the same author travesias. Such travels originated the poem Amereida, written in 1967. Amereida is a vanguard collective poem collecting material of different type and nature, which main topic is search for the American identity within the continent itself, taking distances from the Eurocentric vision of America as a space for the projection of European desires. In 2020, such topics are revisited when Amereida is translated into American English. In 2021, we have organized a series of seminars titled America's Translated Place, Amereida, la traducción latinoamericana, to investigate the main issues concerning Latin American identity and origins arising from such translation. This interdisciplinary project consists of the realization of a monthly seminar in which such topics are discussed from the perspective of one of the three disciplines involved in the project: architecture, literature, and translation studies. So, in what follows? Firstly, we will briefly present the School of Architecture and the Open City. Then we will introduce Amereida, highlighting its origins and the main topics. And then we will describe the main context originated from the series of seminars organized this year. And finally, I will expose some conclusions. Adriana?
What I will read now to you is actually the work of Manuel Florencio Sanfuentes here in the room. Just to clarify what you asked, Maria Jose, we are 4 co-authors. Virginia has taken the lead for this particular paper. Maxwell, Florencio, and Virginia have taken the lead for organizing the seminars. I've joined later, but I'm also contributing. So, Floros' words, Night Butterfly. Among the foundation of the Institute of Architecture and the Travesía de Amereida, the stay in Europe since the mid-50s of Godofredo Yomi should be highlighted. Together with new members of the group formed a band of poets and artists around the form of poetic expression or act or performance, which Yomi called la phalène, a kind of ephemeral poetic act that combines journey, place, word, and plastic expression. This open poetic art form, Yomi embodied in the 1963 publication in Paris of the Letter of the Wanderer, written as a manifesto that puts into play the role of the poet, writing, and the idea of work in poetry. maybe I would move one image now. The images are accompanied, they are not directly linked. Next year, he returned to Chile and performed the first Falene Americana in Viña del Mar, where the word Amereida, the Eneid of America or the Americas, was pronounced. Prelude to a glance at the idea of America that will take shape with the Travesía in 1965, and 2 years later, with the publication of the poem called Amereida, simply with no other, just with references, just Amereida. The reading of the poem, joined with public and stage presentations and confronted with the questions of being a Latin American, generated an important debate between multiple disciplines, arts, and professors that precisely touched on the proposals of the university reform of 1967. The premises of this reform were freedom of study, university autonomy, and co-government. So this debate started from, in the Amereida group specifically, started from the early manifesto of the Universidad Católica de Valparaíso School of Architecture, signed by Godofredo Yomi, professors and students. In the vote for academic senate in 1969, Yomi concludes with the proposal of an association that, quote, will tend to constitute a physical place where the unity, capitalized, unity of life, work, and study founded on freedom may be possible, end of quotation. As a parabolic itinerary, the group founded in 1970 the Open City, Ciudad Abierta in Spanish, in the light of Amereida and the practice of hospitality, in a unique natural place which can be visited to this day. Agoras, vestas, halls, inns, palaces, squares, and a cemetery have been built. Each work is born from a consent and a poetic act done by everybody, which takes place in relation to the world and landscape. It is a way of orienting oneself to give course to the work. I think what you have in the screen are some of these poetic acts of foundation. At the university, the school has been maintained and the Open City resolved the form of its own institutionality with a cooperative and currently with a corporation. Nevertheless, in fact, both Escuela and Ciudad Abierta share the same space of the poetic world in the formation of traits. It is in one is the knowledge, and in the other is not knowing.
As Virginia noted, over the past 3 years, we've undertaken the project of translating Amereida from Spanish to English. And in order to develop a critical examination, both of this translation, as well as of the intercultural elements of Amereida, during 2021, we organized a year-long seminar to discuss the translation among an international group of researchers. After beginning in March 2021, the seminar on the translation of Amereida finally concluded this last Tuesday. The seminar opened with a presentation by Manuel Sanfuentes and myself. First, we discussed the long writing process behind the epic poem Amereida, which started in the 1940s, as well as the history of the reception of Amereida up until today. And secondly, we spoke about the specific problems related to translating the poem to English. Further developing this discussion, we elaborated how the translation of Amereida to English generated a series of provocations with respect to a specifically American translation, with America understood in the hemispheric sense. And during the second session, Georges Basten argued that the translation has been a motor of the political and literary history of Latin America. In addition to introducing various theories of translation, Basten problematized the distinctions between translation, history, and primary source, showing, for example, that at times the primary sources of Latin American history are, in fact, translations of non-Latin American sources. It might be said then that America is constituted by a kaleidoscope of translations and by the inherent power dynamics contained therein. Bastien's discussion generated the following question. If an American identity is constituted, at least in part, by translation, then what identity is constituted by the translation of Amarayda to English? This problematic was picked up by Virginia Mattioli in the subsequent session, where she discussed the lexical choices in the already existing translation of Amarayda to English. It was during this session that one of the more contentious concepts of the seminar was initially raised, the faithfulness of a translation. We discussed amongst the group, for example, that with respect to the translation, to be faithful to the text and to be faithful to a particular articulation of a language is to be faithful to a particular identity. That is, the faithfulness of a translation we were beginning to see was tied to an articulation of a particular collective identity. In the final session of the first half of the seminar, Adriana Macida spoke of various photos taken and pictures drawn during the 1965 trip on which Amarayda was based. I would like to mention one element of her presentation in particular, her discussion of modern map making as a way to establish political control over a territory. The map serves to contain, to know, and in this way to control a geopolitical space. Macida questioned the extent to which Amarayda was engaging critically or otherwise this tradition. In the first session of the second half of the seminar, Manuel Sanfuentes and I summarized the first half of the seminar and then responded to a series of questions that had emerged during the first half of the year. In the words of Sanfuentes, the session discussed the impropriety or the out-of-placeness at the foundation of the American identity explored in Amarayda. In addition, we addressed a significant issue raised during the first half of 2020 of the seminar. Who is the audience of the translation? While we offered a tentative answer, the North Atlantic University classroom, and more specifically courses of world literature, this question remains open. In the next two sessions by Fernando Lara and Gabriela Veronelli, a significant question was raised with regards to Amarayda. To what extent does the poem participate in the coloniality of power in its formulation of an American identity? Whereas Lara pointed at the use of the inverted map of America to discuss the late coming decolonial discourse of the poem, Veronelli introduced a critique with which we are still chewing over. Through its very poetic discourse, Amarayda was perhaps continuing the modern colonial paradigm dating back to the colonial conquest. She urged and is urging us to reconsider the intellectual project in which Amarayda is engaged. In the final session, Isabel Margarita Reyes explored further lexical choices involved in the translation of Amarayda to English. Moreover, she discussed the travesias, voyages at the foundation of Amarayda, the trips taken by the architects of the School of Architecture to new spaces, regions, countries, etc., in order to generate an intercultural architecture of America. Again, understood in the hemispheric sense. In short, the seminar explored the intercultural foundations of Amarayda, as well as the problematics contained therein. For instance, the coloniality of the interculturality of the poem. In addition, it explored the translation of the epic to English. It explored how the translation of the epic to English forced many of us to further consider these intercultural elements. And now back to Virginia.
Yeah, so concluding, the aim of this presentation was to present the effort done by the School of Architecture of Valparaiso as an example of an alternative pedagogical proposal, which, starting from a local reality, try to convert the perspective from which to look at America and American identity by substituting the traditional accepted Eurocentric approach with a new American-centric autonomous point of view. In this sense, the concept of collectivism that characterizes the pedagogical vision of the School of Architecture of Valparaiso and that it's a pillar for the foundation of the Open City, can be seen in relation to the call for the unification of America, actually divided according to Occidental interest and relation of power. Such unification was also one of the goals of the travessias realized by the members of the schools across South America and the proper poem Amereida. In addition, the poem also highlights other topics that challenge the traditional Occidental vision, deeply discussed during the seminar, such as the ones just described by Maxwell previously. So finally, the series of seminars that we are organized that will be followed by the publication of their proceedings and by a series of roundtables to be realized in the next academic years represent an attempt to support and develop the idea of the School of Architectures 40 years later. These are the references we used in this presentation. Thank you for your attention, and we are pleased to answer to your questions and doubts.
Okay, thank you very much, the four of you, for this very, very interesting presentation. I must say, when I was reading your abstracts in order to prepare this session, I was thinking how fortunate I am to be chairing it, because I mean, all the papers I found very, very interesting. So yes, I can see that you have written the web page, right, for the poem translation, right? Okay, any question from any of the people attending this session?
Just to clarify, I think that what Max placed in the chat is actually the link to the seminar series. There may be a link to the original poem, not the translation, because it's not ready yet. But if anything of what Max said about the specific seminars caught anyone's attention, I believe all the seminars are recorded there and accessible. They are in Spanish, but you can see a bit more detail if you're interested.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for clarifying. I wanted to ask you a question. It's partly related with this, and it's related to this idea of the translation. I have read some things about the term Latin America, Hispanic America. So I don't know whether this idea of how to deal, because, well, according to what I remember from what I have read, the expression Hispanic America is more related to a European idea of what the southern part of America is. But there are some people who are not in favor of the use of Latin America, or at least the use of Latino, especially in the United States, to refer to the Spanish-speaking community or the community with a Latin American background. It's difficult to find the words. So I don't know whether you have found this kind of problem, this kind of debate when doing the translation and when reflecting on the way to translate some of the ideas in the original poem. Emmanuel, you are nodding. I don't know whether you'd like to say something.
Maybe. Yeah, very nice to be here with all of you. Thank you. Your question, I think it's the main subject about our seminary, because yeah, we talk about Amereida talk all the time. Amereida talk about just America. No North America or South America or Caribbean America. And it's a quite difficult because United States they call American people, but also South American is American people. We discuss all over the year the question about nomination about America, and there is some words or some different expression like Latin America, Hispanoamerica, or different way. I think this our seminary we don't take one definition of America, but we discuss all this idea of how you can approach our problems of our identities. But we don't have a response or what is a precise concept about our America. But I think it's an opportunity for discuss different way to see America, to think, to approach our continent. Something like that. Maybe Max.
I just want to add in too that the discussions about Latin America and the histories of that concept that you find in the work of Walter Bignolo, Ames McGinnis, and some others, Amarayda is working with a different tradition. Latinity, as you can see from the title, the Aeneid plus America brought together in this portmanteau. Latinity is understood in the Virgilian sense, that it is working with this idea going back to Latinity in the idea of the Roman Empire, so that there is this idea of imperiality based within Latinity itself. In my reading, at least, and this was the end kind of discussion with Fernando Lara, with Gabriela Veronelli, is what is Amarayda doing with this reference to Latinity in this Virgilian sense. And if you see the introductory remarks that were written afterwards by Godofredo Iomi, his references are always to this long tradition of Italian literature, of Virgil, rather than this tradition of Latin America that dates back to the 19th century. So there's this interesting, and it's been a depending on your perspective, a critique or a strength of the Open City, of the School of Architecture, this sort of eccentricism of the separation from the hegemonic history of the term to offer a different perspective.
Sorry, thank you very much. It was, any further comments from any of the members of the group? Would you like to add something to what has been discussed now, or any members of the audience? Would you like to ask any other questions? Okay, right. So, well, thank you very much because you have kept to the time that you were assigned. So, thank you very much for doing this. So, and you are getting some clapping from the audience. That's very nice, very good. Right. So, our next speaker is Wenwen Yang. I must say one of our most active participants in the conference. Thank you very much for all the questions you have been asking, and I'm sure you are going to do a very good presentation. So as we have said before, Wenwen Yang is going to speak about Chinese postgraduate sojourners, Wechat community. Okay, so Wenwen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hi everyone. This is Wenwen, and I'm a second-year PhD student from Newcastle University. And I'm going to introduce a program still in progress. So any suggestions or criticism are welcomed. So this research is on Wechat in line with the Chinese postgraduates sojourners ICC development in the UK. So from the title itself, you can see there are three basic factors: Chinese sojourner postgraduates, ICC, and then Wechat. This research interest origins basically from my personal background as a Chinese postgraduate myself, and my experience of as a language teacher from different cultural background, and then my immense usage of Wechat and the immense support I get since I came to study here in Newcastle. So now I'm going to introduce some basic background context of this research. This research is in the social context of globalization, of course, and it entails the tendency of worldwide student sojourning in education. Among all the international students studying in UK, Chinese students from mainland China, account for more than 1/3 of non-EU students and makes up the largest cohort studying in the UK. Postgraduates account for approximately 60% of the overall population. So the current literature shows that international students in general needs to deal with the psychological and social cultural challenges. Chinese students are criticized to be the least adjusted group, thus worth our academic attention. Well, how can the individuals survive this new era of globalization? Chen and Starcosta address the importance of ICC as a critical ability. Okay, sorry, I forgot to say, while addressing the Chinese postgraduate sojourners, we need to keep in mind that it's not a homogeneous group, it's a heterogeneous group, which we will touch on in a bit. So Beardolf and Jackson and many scholars conquer the importance of ICC in helping students cope.
And when I'm afraid the image and the sound is frozen. I don't know whether you can hear us.
With adaptation.
When can you hear me?
Hello, Maria Jose. I'm sending when a message, an internal message, okay?
Right. Let's see if... Okay, I guess she has gone out and maybe she's coming back and try. Okay, let's wait for a couple of minutes and see if she can solve whatever problem she has got. And otherwise, we'll have to move to the following speaker, but let's wait for a couple of minutes. Can anyone see whether she's trying to get connected again?
Oh, Maria. Hi, I'm trying to send her a message actually on Wechat because Wenwen is one of my students. So yes, maybe we can give her a minute and see if she can come back.
Yeah. So Sarah, are you a user of Wechat?
Yes, so I was actually wondering if everybody knows what WeChat is.
Okay, so if you can give us some background about it in the meantime.
So I can actually show it to you on my phone. So, okay, given that I'm a social media user, but not an expert of the different categories, I think that WeChat can be understood maybe as a Chinese Facebook or Instagram. So it's, you get a little app on your phone. You can see is the green. So basically it's like a WhatsApp if you want. Mm-hmm. And inside there are different functions. So you can, chat to people. Okay, Ivan, sorry, I was just breaking in and explaining what WeChat
Thank
is.
you.
So yes, it's
thank you, Sarah.
like a WhatsApp, but mostly used by Chinese users. So you can contact people and talk to them, but you can also access information available there a little bit as you would do on Facebook.
Oh, okay, Sarah, thank you very much. When we had Sarah here, she was explaining a bit about how WeChat works. Okay, thank you for coming back. And so let's see if we can continue. Right.
Yeah, sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah, and thank you for Sarah for briefing WeChat for me. Yeah, exactly. So according to the New York Times, it's described as a Swiss Army knife app, which influence people's everyday life. So the connection between WeChat and the ICC studies, like they both have shared research interest in regarding identity, acculturation, and integration, and the relationships between power and culture. And this area is greatly under-researched and is claimed by some researchers, shooter as the new frontier for its revolutionary effect of social media. So that's basically the context of this research. And studies on WeChat described all the advantage of WeChat offers students in psychological meaning and adaptation, releasing stress, etc. Many scholars criticize the WeChat for impedes the students' interaction with the local, because with all the friends on WeChat, they don't have to interact with the British people, as some scholars said. So the research gap of current studies is like there are lack of researches on the multilingual and multicultural aspects of CPS communication on WeChat. So WeChat is not only for Chinese users only. There are about 1 million international users. So and also on WeChat, many students use like apps or websites of different languages, and they do self-reflection about the interactions happens in person. Okay, and also there are lack of researches on WeChat and the students' ICC development, and there are lack of in-depth studies on how WeChat influence their experiences. So my main research question is, what is the role of WeChat in line with Chinese international students' sojourning experiences in UK? And there are 3 sub-questions. So the first one is, to what degree does WeChat enable intercultural communications? It means both happens directly on WeChat with like culture others and those in person, but got translated into WeChat. The second one is, how does WeChat influence CPS development of ICC individual aspects in the novel context of British higher education? Then the third one is, what are the outcomes of CPS ICC development in relation to WeChat? So this study is going to be an empirical study on 15 cross-cultural master students coming from mainland and don't have prior experience of living abroad. In terms of literature review, there are 3 parts. First is about intercultural communication. The definition adopted here is the exchange of information between individuals who are unlike culturally. And then this is some supplementary, like unlike culturally, the difference are enough to influence communication event. So the definition adopted here is mainly one of the three directions in the field: cross-cultural communication, intercultural communication, and interdiscourse communication. So cross-cultural communication is criticized by its essentialism, and interdiscourse communication try to look at the communication in an interpersonal basis through the discourse. But in terms of the target, the aim of this research as an ethnographic research, I adopt the ICC, like intercultural communication concept. However, this struggle between different kinds of directions I described as dilemma also transcend into the empirical ethnographic studies, because it's inevitably involving grouping people. Thus, it has the danger of essentialism. To tackle the first research question, the intercultural communication enabled on Wechat, it is easy to have a look at their social ties, like co-nationals, host nationals, and non-compatriot internationals. But by doing so, it's kind of like recognize students' background from a different nation, which is essentialism and nationalism, that doesn't fit the standpoint of this research. But on the other extreme, if culture is described as this dynamic enabling covering like differences in terms of age, profession, gender, religion, class, region, then all communication is to some degree interculture. Thus, how can we conduct any kind of ethnographic studies? So to tackle this question, I'm going to adopt a critical perspective. So recognizing the difference might exist between different groups of people, but focusing also on issues of power, context, and historical forces in engaging culture and intercultural communication relations. So after we figured out the intercultural communication, then another question occurs, like why some students are better competent than the others. Thus, assessing ICC is vital, since every Chinese overseas student use Wechat, but they have different levels of adoption. So the second part of literature review is assessing ICC, which has great theoretical and practical significance. For this research, the theoretical contributions of assessing ICC is to fill the gap of current literature on ICC researches in line of social media, which is Wechat here, and also to investigate factors of ICC models in the novel context of British higher education. Well, practically, it can also help people to know more about the CPS and help them to relieve difficulties while studying in the UK. However, there are over 100 existing assessment models in literature. While though Spitzberg and Chanon has categorized them basically into 5 types, there are still plenty of them. And in this research, I adopt Deardorff's process model. So Deardorff's as illustrated in the figure, this process model envisions ICC development as a simultaneous interactional process that feeds back into itself at almost all levels, and sees ICC development as an ongoing and continual process. Though individuals can interprocess the model from any point, attitude is seen as a fundamental starting point to enhance the upper level of ICC components of knowledge and skills. And meanwhile, these components are broken down into more specific and measurable indicators, namely attitudes, knowledge, and comprehension and skills. So this model is the main theoretical framework of this research and it can give us more insights that are tailored for CPS sojourner life in the context of globalization and education, and help us to answer directly our second research question, namely figuring out the influence of Wechat on students' personal ICC development. But considering a majority of existing ICC models, including Deardorff's process model, took a culture general approach, both and also considering the low level of students' social ties with host nationals and increasingly importance of international ties. This research will also look into how culture-specific and culture general factors are represented in students' personal ICC to supplement current literature. In addition to the personal competence, the model emphasized the outcomes of intercultural encounters, both internal and external. The internal outcome can enhance external outcome though a person can achieve external outcome without a full internal outcome, but the degree of such outcome will be more limited. So assessing the outcome of ICC offers insights to the third research question. The research might add more insights into the components of ICC outcomes on the basis of Deardorff's model. So this research is going to be empirical study and conducted on 15 cross-cultural master students, as mentioned earlier. Such choice is made for 3 reasons. First, the relatively less intercultural communication experiences offer a good ground to study their first mobility experience. Second, the choice of major in the focus group indicates their strong motivation to interact interculturally, which is comparable to this research. Thirdly, it is more convenient to access to them since we're from the same school. So data will be collected through individual interviews and then a pre-interview questionnaire, then followed by a focus group discussion. And the Wechat records and their pics or articles are also going to be used with the students' permission, of course. The limitation of this research is we have very limited participants. So it's difficult to say, to generalize these 15 students experience into the whole Chinese international students group. And then the restraint of students majors, they are on CCC master students only. So doesn't necessarily the other majors share the same experience. And then the third limitation is fail to conduct any longitudinal study. That was the original plan, but due to a limited time, it's hardly going to be conducted this way. And in terms of ethics and COVID influence, none of the students are underage. So yeah, and they are going to be given consent form and any data are going to be used with their permission. The COVID, since this is a research about social media online, therefore, even though, yeah, COVID, even though there's another lockdown, we hope not, that doesn't necessarily affect the conduction of this research, but the result might be slightly different. Yeah, so this is still a research in progress and I don't have much conclusion now yet. So yeah, welcome any criticism or suggestions so I can make this project better.
Could you show the references just for a few seconds in case there are some people interested in having a look at them?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. So, any questions from the audience? Yes, Ramsey.
Yeah, hello, Wenwen. Thank you so much for a lovely presentation. I will just have some comments on the theoretical part. Basically, working in the field of intercultural studies, I came across Deerdorf's research-based intercultural competence framework, along with other models of intercultural competence, such as the pyramid model, the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity of Benet, the ICO-PROMO model. My comments are coming from that particular part. My first question is that, like, do you know the history behind the development of Deerdorf's model of intercultural competence? Do you know how it was developed? Basically, I will just answer that as well. Deerdorf's model is research-based. So what Deerdorf did is that they gathered different researchers from around the world, and then they created the intercultural competence model based on the output received from those academics. And the problems there were some inclusions and exclusions based on literally essentialist conceptions of culture. So basically, in order for Deerdorf to develop the model, they excluded certain academics from the eastern part of the world, because they said that those people are usually collectivists, they are not individualists. And that's actually what happened to develop the model. So from the very beginning, there is some form of essentialism in the development of the model. And the second thing I want to comment on is that it's related to how Juliana Ferry, she wrote a book about critical intercultural communication. Is that like how intercultural communicative competence is really approached? It's really approached as a set of skills that you actually master. And then once you master all those skills, you become interculturally competent and you become able to navigate any cultural environment, regardless of its intricacy, which is really problematic because it denies any existence of the other from the very beginning, because you're getting skills, you're not getting to know the other and who is this other in the first place. So you're getting some form of tools. And is that actually the case for interculturality? I always find it problematic. That's why I just wanted to share a comment with you. Thank you.
And when you are muted, when you are muted.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So yeah, thank you, Ramsey, for your lovely comment, despite my chaotic presentation. Yeah, it's a little bit in a mess. But yeah, thank you very much. I also struggled a lot between this, like the essentialism, the nationalism, with grouping people is kind of like feels inevitable, right? And then how we keep the balance between the two, and about like the Western-centric ideas, or yeah, the origin of Deerdorf's model. Well, I guess in this big literature context, basically many theories, many literature are Western-centric. That's why my research is important. Yeah, so because it's not from the Western viewpoint. But I will keep in mind what you mentioned, and then during my research, I will like look deeper into the struggles, the challenges, I call dilemma, how to deal with this. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Wenwen. Maxwell Woods, would you like to, I can see your hand raised.
Yeah, I am like Adriana, out of my field, but I have a very basic question from the start of the presentation when you mentioned that the Chinese students were the least accustomed within the university. And my question is just simply, who is saying this, and how is that discourse being articulated? As I imagine that who is saying it and how that discourse is being, for whom is this a problem?
Okay.
I think that's going to be going to affect a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. So give me 1 second. Well, actually, I dropped that sentence to draw people's attention.
I think Wen must have get herself cut off by mistake. We can't see her here, can we? So let's again, because we still have 5 more minutes.
Sorry, back again. Don't know.
Yeah.
Didn't happen when I wasn't doing anything important. Yeah, sorry. Back again. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, well, yeah, I use this sentence to draw people's attention. So this is a conclusion drawn by Joe and his colleagues and Wechat. And yeah, these are researches conducted in 2008 and 2010. I don't know if the situation has changed a little bit, but also the UK, what is the organization called? Yeah, the higher education report, there is a report also says Chinese students and the Indian students, they stuck together with their own co-nationals. That's a concern, a main concern. But I looked into the researches on the other international students, and actually the other students, the other international students also have a closer tie with their co-nationals. So I don't think it's something unique to Chinese students, but because the big number and the amount of attention Chinese students draw, they draw more criticism. That's also one aspect of my research. It's like I want to conduct a research that help people to get rid of some stereotypes. So many problems doesn't happen only to Chinese students, but also to the other students too. Yeah.
Thank you, Wen. Maxwell, would you like to ask any further questions? You are satisfied with the answer?
No, I think giving time to other people.
So okay, Ramsey has suggested Intercultural Communication, Critical Approaches and Future Challenges by Juliana Ferry. She's the author he mentioned before, right?
Yeah, thank you so much.
So it's here. Adriana?
I think Adriana, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, yes, I have a question, but I was letting the specialists talk because maybe my question is also very basic. I'm an architect, so you can see how much I'm out of my field here. But there is a term that caught my attention in Wenwen's presentation, which was super interesting. Wenwen, thank you. The term competence. I'm not an English native speaker, which is part of this conversation, but competence resonated in my mind as if the discourse, the theoretical framework you were summarizing for us was very much focused first on the individual, although there's of course a community, but also on the individual's ability, as if there was a responsibility placed on the individual's shoulders to adapt to the culture. There doesn't seem to be, I mean, some other ways in which this discourse could be constructed would relate to the ability of the collective or the culture that receives these students to adapt to them, to the complexity of the group being immigrant, which you raised, but also the complexity of the environment that receives them, how things change over time. Yeah, I just wanted to know a bit more about this term competence, because it feels like skills or something like that. And then it feels like all these students are being almost judged or measured in parameters about how they adapt. And that feels, looking really very much from outside, problematic. If I make a big jump, my research is on urban informality and shantytowns, and we do discuss a lot whether spaces of urban poverty are being assessed or read as the residents' responsibility, the residents' blame, the socio-cultural structure blame, the architect's fault, or all of that, or whether housing is a right or housing is something that charity provides. All these questions have no definite answer, but I was just curious of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I agree with Ramsey. That's good observation, exactly. But among all the models, there are also others address the context and etc. And for the purpose of this research, the result is, yeah, and thank you for Sarah for offering an article which is highly relevant to it. But for this research, is not to judge them like whether they are good or enough or bad. And because I'm also one of the inner group, I'm not the outer group judging them. So the purpose is to support them, like how these intercultural communications conducted on Wechat produce different outcomes, how it changed their attitude. I think attitude is everything. If they have a negative attitude towards the hostile, they avoid like interactions. So it's like how their attitudes are formed. For knowledge and skills, they are with affect the attitudes. So that's the main purpose. And I hope that can support students instead of like adding more pressure on them.
Just to clarify, I meant that the pressure or the judgment will be the framework or the discourse, not your own, not your projects.
Yeah.
But maybe your project wants to interrogate this a bit further because it still reads or feels like providing support to someone who has a task to comply with and the others don't. The others involved in the equation don't have anything to do. But it's super interesting as a side comment. It's maybe even a question. The Chinese community of students in the UK seems to have a long history, doesn't it? Because I've been an Argentine student in the UK. The Argentine community is tiny. There's not that tradition, and I've always had that impression. So I was just curious whether it has any impact on the interactions you find.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a very, very good observation indeed.
Okay, thank you very much, Adriana, for your question, and thank you, Wen, for your answer. Thank you also, Sarah, because you have provided us with reference a free access paper by Claudia Borghetti on the need to assess intercultural competence. So thank you for that. So, well, we have to move on to the following presenter, the following paper. Our next speaker is Andres Valencia, and he's going to talk about an intercultural carol, the ghosts of past, present, and future interculturality. So, Andres, the screen rather than the floor is yours. You can start whenever you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose, and thank you for the attendees for coming to this session. This is the overview of the contents that I will address this morning. My work, I'm a language teacher, educator at a public university, is situated politically, culturally, and pedagogically in Colombia, particularly in the province of Valle del Cauca, the city of Santiago de Cali, one of the most diverse in terms of gender and ethnic racial characteristics. And of course, it is situated at Universidad del Valle. So this presentation is organized around Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. The proposed analogy is based on the comparison offered by the deep meaning embodied in the main character, Mr. Scrooge, and the three ghosts, and the traced timeline seen through the prism of interculturality. In this sense, I will compare how this concept has been mobilized, both in language teaching and in my own practices, always keeping the analogy with the story. Of course, the proposed temporality is arbitrary and intentional, as are the examples and the models chosen. Others researchers will offer their own. Regarding the context, A Christmas Carol was written during a paradigmatic transition in 19th century England, signaling a shift from agrarian, rural, dispersed societies to urban, industrialized ones. This tale is both a critique and a warning of the dehumanizing effects of industrialization and early capitalism. Today, like Dickens, we are amid a paradigm shift, namely the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where new forms of production and value creation are emerging. Interculturality, keeping its due proportions, is one of those elements. Here, before developing my proposal, I will briefly explain the following constructs: culture, language, and interculturality. In line with Castaneda Fernandez, culture is taken from a cultural production approach. It is not what people are, what people have, or even what people value. Culture is what people do. Incorporating Liddicoate's and Escarino's proposal and going beyond it, I paraphrase Larsen Freeman's complexity-inspired view of language that rejects the notion of language as something to be taken, a static commodity to be acquired and thus possessed. On the contrary, language is both process and product, an activity in which one participates. Since language is a dynamic, continually shifting system, its potential is continually unfolding and never fully realized. This applies to the language of a speech community as well as to and into language. After Medina Lopez Portillo and Sinigan, intercultural competence is a set of individual skills that can be acquired or learned, something curricular. I will explain later what I mean by contrasting curriculum versus pedagogy. Whereas, as you all know, interculturality is a political, ethical, relational, cultural, and pedagogical project of social transformation. The questions around which my intervention will hinge this morning are: how has interculturality been mobilized in the field of foreign language teaching? And this question will be further qualified first by elucidating the relationship between language and culture in models of intercultural teaching. Second, by analyzing who and what counts as the inter in these models of interculturality. And finally, by analyzing the models and highlighting a few pedagogical implications. In its deep political pedagogical sense, interculturality interrogates, problematizes, and denounces the way of being, thinking, and feeling embodied by Mr. Scrooge. The Scrooge mode is not a person, a social group, or a national attribute. It is a set of cultural and discursive practices, institutional arrangements, or in Foucauldian terms, a set of technologies of social, racial, and sexual disciplining. The Scrooge mode hinges on a rational and economy-oriented view of language, teaching, and learning, where what counts as knowledge is what can be measured and therefore standardized. The Scrooges embody, and I say this with caution, the monolingual in either English or Spanish for our Latin American case, monocultural, capitalist, healthy body, Christian, heteropatriarchal, and phallogocentric curricula and pedagogies that promote white Western subjectivities. Now let's go back to A Christmas Carol. The first spirit takes Scrooge back to his childhood, confronting him with a sense of benevolence and community that makes him aware of the core values with which he was socialized, contrasting his current loneliness. Now, in the field of language teaching, this disconnection could be explained in terms of the two models of intercultural competence that prevailed in the field. The first, on your left, originating from linguistics, sociolinguistics, and later applied linguistics, focuses on language, including some elements of culture. Schematically, it could be represented as lang in uppercase and cult in lowercase. The second model on your right, coming from anthropology, focuses on culture and includes language learning. Graphically, it could be represented as cult uppercase and lang lowercase. Among the examples of the first models is that of Celso Murcia. These models include sociolinguistic or sociocultural competence, which emphasizes contextual appropriateness in the form of produce the right language in the right moment for the right people. However, appropriateness means conforming to a norm. There is therefore no negotiation. Context in these models conditions communication. These models prioritize language development rather than intercultural learning. Therefore, the goal of language learning of the language learners is to approximate native speakers' proficiency. Consequently, the division of culture and therefore interculturality is marginal. Culture is present but not articulated in language. Indeed, performance is coded as a function of becoming a native speaker. Being proficient in the second or foreign language is linked to American or British whiteness, and the production of competent language uses requires a cognitive and affective synthesis with the target language culture. There is no inter in the relational or dialogical sense. There is no recognition of interlinguistic contact, so an intra-linguistic perspective is encouraged. The second model second models could be illustrated by Byram's model of intercultural communicative competence. Byram's proposal articulates the linguistic and the intercultural as an interactive process. However, it is not clear how the linguistic dimensions shape and are shaped by intercultural competence. This model incorporates 5 savoirs that constitute the attitudinal, existential, cognitive, and behavioral components that inform intercultural competence. Again, it is also unclear how these 5 savoirs relate to each other and therefore how they inform intercultural competence. I'm sorry, there is a helicopter. Their model emerged as a transition from competence to orientations, you know, what Adriana Maciel was asking a little bit later before. This competence hinges on both linguistic, communicative, and intercultural, that is, symbolic competencies. It emphasizes the relevance of social semiotics within an ecological perspective of communication. As a relational model, it highlights corporeality, identity, and cultural production practices. What is not clear, however, is how power differences condition the negotiation of meaning-making among the speakers, or how one's own culture is positioned vis-a-vis the culture of the target language. I wonder whether it is symmetrically or not. The definition does not provide answers in this regard. To illustrate these relationships between language and culture that emerge from these models, I want to share an activity that I used to carry out with my students, where we used to study the, one deep cultural theme, which is the conception of time. And the communicative components, of course, for this kind of activities involves reaching a consensus where time is negotiated with someone from another culture and therefore a different time orientation. Grammatically, verb tenses can be taught or reviewed. Students can be made aware that some verbs, tenses do exist in English, but do not exist in Spanish and vice versa. At the assessment level, students' understanding of different time orientations can be assessed by exposing them to many cases. As you may know, the business world is an endless source of examples available on the internet. Likewise, the communicative competence can be assessed in all its dimensions if the students, of course, achieves agreement or not. Thus, in this kind of activities, there is language and culture, but upon closer analysis of the activity, there is no interculturality. Usually, the inter is posed between two essentialized and stereotyped national cultures based on a totalizing notion, disregarding internal cultural differences. For example, in terms of gender, or urban versus rural, or in terms of age or generational differences. So the first synthesis that I come up with is that the models evoked by the ghosts of interculturality's past could be considered aspirational as the language learner aspires to blend in to become or approximate the desired native speaker other, ignoring his or her perspectives, values, and histories. These models do not question the relationship between the language and culture of the learner and the target language. They materialize as if they were detached from the consequences of the interaction between social dynamics such as race, ethnicity, social class, gender, L1, religion, etc., and social spheres, that is, the economic, cultural, and political, as if these relationships were, quote unquote, reciprocal or symmetrical all the time. In contrast, authors such as Emily Hicks offer the thesis that the operations of race, class, and gender relations at the level of everyday practices in schools and workplaces is systematically contradictory or non-synchronous. People, open quote, do not share an identical consciousness or express the same interests, need, or desires at the same time in moment, close quoting. These models leave these questions moot or pending. Coming back to A Christmas Carol, the second spirit confronts Scrooge with ignorance and desire, that is, with what he has deliberately ignored, rejected, or failed to see. Ignorance involves the stabilizing certainties, whereas desire involves reaching out inward and outward. This ghost activates two orientations, not models, of interculturality. The first is illustrated by Scarino. This orientation articulates, as you may see, language, culture, and learning in a dynamic, emergent, and nonlinear way. It foregrounds learner identities, context, meaning-making, negotiation practices, and power differences. The problem shifts from what is interculturality to what does interculturality do. This orientation is premised on the development of capabilities in opposition or in response to competence, which affects the nature of teaching, learning, and of course, assessment practices. As Scarino explains, this orientation reconfigures notions such as performance, awareness, interpretation, and reflexivity in the language learning process. Indeed, it undertakes the distinction between intra and interculturality. As she states, open quote, in any act of communication and equally in any act of learning, people are engaged in interpreting the self, that is the intra, and the other, the inter, in various contexts of social and cultural interaction. This transition from models to orientation signals the principled rather than prescriptive nature of the growth of this notion. The second working definition to be analyzed is that of Vera Ferrao Candal from Brazil. Now then, in Colombia, this has yet to be achieved. We speak of interculturality, mainly concerning foreign cultures and languages, ignoring first the varieties of cultures imbricated in the same Colombian or Spanish-speaking cultures, and second, the multiple Amerindian languages, the two African Creoles that we have here in Colombia, and their respective cultures. Language and culture learning are now related not in curricular, but in pedagogical terms. In previous models, those evoked by the ghost of past interculturality, language and culture learning were focused on the relationship between the individual and knowledge. As it is explained by Gastambide Fernandez, and here I quote him in extenso, curriculum like cosmopolitanism is directed toward the self. It is about what individuals should know, be able to do, or about understanding individual experiences and fomenting an individual orientation toward difference. Instead, like solidarity, pedagogy is directed toward the relational and highlights the process by which we are made by others through and into difference. Pedagogy takes place in an encounter between subjects who are also made and therefore transformed in and through the encounter as subjects. This onto-epistemological turn from curriculum to pedagogy is based on transformation, solidarity, equity, justice, and complementarity. The inter in interculturality implies the articulation of a double framework. First, as an intra or reflexive movement, examining students' languages, linguistic varieties, cultures, and social dimensions in a non-synchronic manner. And second, an inter or outreach movement to engage with otherness, alterity, and diversity in a meaningful and reciprocal way. I learned this activity from Jim Cummins at OEC University of Toronto. It brings together identities, cultures, language learning as communication, the past, present, and future of students through the arrangement of different cultural semiotic and design resources. For example, these identity texts here relates race, Black with place, the Pacific Ocean. This one here, his indigenous world through the corn. This one, mental disorders and traumatic experiences. This other here, the questioning of sexual orientation. And finally, this one, cultural affiliations such as veganism. Of course, this way of mobilizing interculturality poses problems for assessment. As a teacher, one wonders what to assess, that communicative, the student's creative capacity without, in my case, being an artist, the intra and the intercultural awareness. What is it that we, should assess? The second synthesis that I come up with is that as a pedagogical and non-curricular projects, these orientations to interculturality, they challenge traditional, episodic, discrete, and summative assessment schemes, adding another layer of difficulty for both teacher and languages programs. Consequently, I believe that interculturality is not to be assessed, but to be developed from sameness or identity and otherness or alterity. Rather than to be measured, the ideal is to develop understanding and attitudes that allow respect for oneself and for the other. And I'm about to finish. The last spirit, in fact, a specter confronts Scrooge with his own death. As a foreshadowing move, it encourages Scrooge to review his past and present, to envision new directions in his present life. As articulated by Peña Dix, Tejada Sanchez, and Trusco de Mejia in the recent book, Interculturality in Colombia is being mobilized at the curricular, pedagogical, and research levels. It is a field in dispute and at the same time promising. As a field in dispute, it emphasizes an ethical dimension, foregrounding questions about the intersection between interculturality and information and communication technologies. ICTs have always been disruptive technologies. They have transformed the way we do business, education, banking, and entertainment. Now it is less clear how they will help articulate new and different forms of citizenship. This slide displays Prospecta America and Bill Halal's transformative technologies in the next decades. Of course, there is a whole niche to explore here. Bioethics and biotechnologies, as you may know, the current pandemic caused by COVID-19 has highlighted the interdependence and the interrelationships between human, non-human, organic, and inorganic life forms and entities. So interculturality has also here a promising field of research. And finally, interculturality deals with context. So at the heart of this dilemma is a new view of context. This implies a recognition of place and time itself, a redimensioning of what is familiar. Without going any further, in Colombia, the massive migration of Venezuelans is reshaping our values as society. So educating for interculturality implies, therefore, new commitments and responsibilities at the curricular, pedagogical, assessment, and research levels, new ways of facing otherness, difference, therefore, new articulations of the available cultural semiotic resources. And to close this with an illustration, this project that I share here was an iterative performance carried out with a group of English 6 pre-service students teachers of the foreign languages program at Universidad del Valle in 2019. Through this political cultural activity, we sought to generate awareness in the university community about the femicides and gender violence in our province. For this, we articulated notions of critical interculturality, decoloniality, gender, and identity. Women, as you can see here, were characterized, not disguised, as men, men as women. For instance, an indigenous female student impersonated a settler. This performance allowed us to question those practices whereby we seek to politicize students by engaging them, in hot topics like gender violence, embodiment, or sexual identities, yet without disclosing our own identifications. We not only interrogated, but denounced heteropatriarchy, heteronormativity in our society. So, all in all, as a promising field, interculturality will help us develop tools to push the knowledge frontier marked by the and the connection between language and culture. And intercultural orientation will help us, address new forms of ethnocentrism, nationalism, heteropatriarchalism, hetero and homonormativity, phallococentrism, graphocentrism, verbocentrism, as well as new forms of oppression. Interculturality is a future-oriented, inter, multi, and transdisciplinary field. As I have shown in this presentation, it is both a pedagogical and a curricular practice that not only questions the way the world is organized in the present, but also seeks to transform how the world will be to engender new ways of forms of coexistence. Thank you very much. All these images were taken from Dean Morris's and Stephen Krenke's adaptation of A Christmas Carol. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andres, for a fascinating presentation. I must say I love this metaphor with, comparing your talk or structuring it on Dickens's novel. One of my areas of expertise is Victorian literature, so I was really fascinated by that. So you are getting some messages on the chat. Amazing work, Andres. Ramsey says, very interesting. Thank you, Jacob. So let's see if we can have some fascinating comments and maybe some questions. Maxwell, I can see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Andres, for the really fascinating presentation, especially talking about English language learning here in Chile. Very, very helpful. I just want to mention two things. One, there's a contrasting interpretation of the Christmas Carol from Lee Edelman, who argues that it is not a heteropatriarchal text. In fact, Scrooge is gay. Scrooge, who leaves his fiancée in order to enter into a lifelong partnership with Marley. And then when Marley dies, he refuses to take down Marley's name. And his chambermaid calls his life unnatural. And the critique of capitalism, according to Kim, is in fact a homophobic critique of the narcissism of homosexuality, insofar as Scrooge refuses to raise a family. So there's this contrasting that if it enters into a literary context, that this critique is definitely going to get raised. That the foundation of A Christmas Carol is actually homophobia. And then the other, I just wanted to mention, also coming from literary studies, the thesis that you're exploring, the touchstone for us at least is Gayatri Spivak. And aesthetic education in the era of globalization, in which she touches on this, saying that intercultural language learning must be done through literature, that it is literature precisely that does this. So those, when just two minor points, especially if you enter in literary studies, those two names are definitely going to come up.
Thank you very much, Max. I appreciate them because, yeah, if I, would like to publish this, those are things that will come up. So those are very keen insights. I took actually the Scrooge mode from Jen Kenway's, as I, projected there in the slide. She's the one that, let's say envisions Scrooge as, heteropatriarchal, but yeah, I'm gonna, look for a more comprehensive and nuanced way of addressing this metaphor. So thank you very much for both those sources and references.
Any other comments or questions? Is someone trying to speak? Sorry, I don't know whether I cannot see anyone else's microphone open apart from Andres and myself. So any further comments? Okay, yes, you have here two more references. Andres, I must say I will be very interested and will be expecting this to see this work published. I found some of the activities you presented. This sorry, I can't remember how you call them, but it was this kind of collage with for identity and for some cultural stances, and I found that activity really very engaging. And then the last one you showed with you not disguising but just impersonating these personalities. Yes, Ramsey, even if we are over our time, we have time for our last question.
Yeah, just quickly. Thank you so much, Andres. It was really amazing. I just want to ask, like, is this already in press? Is this being published soon? How can we know more about it? It would be really nice if you answer this.
Thank you, Ramsey. No, it hasn't been published. Actually, it was part of a presentation for my tenure application. So it will be published, and I'm gonna how do you say this, like take advantage of IALIC's proposal, to publish our presentations in this special issue of the journal. So I will do my best to publish this, and as well as that try to, let's say, bring more of the work that I do, which is around decolonial feminism, into, let's say, to inform interculturality. Because as you have mentioned, and perhaps this resonated with Adriana, with Maxwell, with Virginia and Manuel, this resonates a lot. The way in which I work resonates a lot with what we do in Latin America, not to let us, like, let's say, we are questioning nowadays more and more how we relate, especially to the global North. We're seeking or looking towards more equitable horizontal relationships, and everything begins by analyzing the models that we use to teach. That is, it implies analyzing our pedagogies, our writing and reading practices. So we are interrogating and problematizing in a way to denaturalize, certain things that has become, let's say, like models and ways of being in this world. So decoloniality is taking like a lot of strength in Latin America and the Caribbean, precisely because we believe that post-coloniality, perhaps it belongs more to India and to these African, South Asian countries. But decoloniality is something that some of our scholars have been talking about since the 1970s, 80s, perhaps before. And it corresponds to a more nuanced, but at the same time, more politically active way of, let's say, establishing relationships among ourselves and our differences, and the difference that allow us language learning and teaching. So thank you very much, and I appreciate all your comments, particularly those two references by Max. I will definitely take a look at them.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we come to a close, we have been asked to take screenshots. So if you could please turn on your cameras. And Ramsey, I would like to ask you for a favor. Could you do the screenshot? Because the only way I know how to do it is to insert it on a Word document. I don't know whether.
No problem at all.
Okay,
Okay,
right. So
yeah, I'll just wait for people to turn on their
Yes.
cameras. I'll give you like 10 seconds and then I'll take a screenshot.
So while you do this, I would like to thank all the presenters and all the people attending this session, and to say it has been, I mean, I said it before, it has been a fantastic session, very, very interesting, and with very relevant points raised over the session. Thank you very much, all of you.
Yeah, perfect. I took screenshots. Thank you so much.
Okay, so bye-bye, and I hope to see you again on another IALIC conference. Thank you.